Why is it so hard to trust people nowadays? How do you know if a person will deceive you or not? My wife looked like an ordinary girl, modest and sweet, and I would never have thought in my life that in a fit of anger she would send me a video where she cheats on me to show how worthless I am. She would regret it. How do you rebuild trust after being betrayed? I once believed in love. She was my partner, my confidant. Debbie and I had been married for 6 years until I discovered it was all a facade. We resided in Portland then. Debbie had recently landed a position as an internal auditor at the city's largest real estate firm, while I worked in sales for a national machine tools manufacturer. Typically, my work took me away from downtown, focusing more on suburban and rural areas of Western Oregon. However, on this particular day, I found myself with a rare extra 2 hours in the city. I phoned Debbie, suggesting lunch, but was met with disappointment when she explained she needed to finalize a spreadsheet before an important meeting. Determined not to waste the free time, I headed to Jake's for a bowl of their crawfish étouffée. As I savored the rich sauce over rice, I couldn't help but overhear the animated chatter of the women at the nearby table. Their ability to converse simultaneously always intrigued me, a skill seemingly exclusive to women. As I sat there, a smile playing on my lips, I pondered how anyone could decipher the nonsensical chatter. Then, one of the women uttered something that snapped me out of my reverie. It seemed I wasn't the sole person captivated by her query, as the other 3 women abruptly fell silent. So, is Deborah Miller getting cozy with Simon Walker? That question instantly grabbed my attention. You see, my wife goes by Deborah professionally, reserving the nickname Debbie for close friends and family. And Miller? Well, that's our shared surname since we tied the knot. I'm Mark Miller, by the way. One of the women inquired, "Why? What do you know?" To which the first woman replied, "I happened to be in Deborah's office when she received a call from her husband. She declined his offer, citing some excuse about working through lunch. Yet 5 minutes later, Simon popped his head in, asking if she was ready to leave. She nodded at Simon, then turned beet red as she caught my eye, clearly flustered that I'd overheard her fib to her husband. Her words weighed heavily on my heart, yet I remained attentive as the other women continued their gossip. Simon wasted no time in ensnaring another married woman, did he? Deborah's barely been at the office for a month. And it's only been 2 months since Heidi Johnson left. I heard her husband made her quit after finding out about her affair with Simon. Can you believe a mother of 2 young children falling for Simon's lies? What's his secret? Besides those piercing blue eyes the Ryan Gosling looks, and I've heard rumors about his rather impressive assets. Laughter erupted among the women. I had heard enough, so I settled my bill and left for my car. The rest of the day was a blur, consumed by thoughts of how to confirm my suspicions. If Debbie was indeed involved with that jerk, our relationship was over. Should I hire a private investigator to tail her, or were there alternative methods? On a whim, I called Debbie's office, posing as a vendor. The receptionist informed me that Ms. Miller was out and would return at 2:00. Any hope I had of the gossip being baseless quickly dwindled. When Debbie returned home that evening, I made an effort to appear unaffected, though I was close to losing my composure when she apologized for missing our lunch plans. She even had the audacity to give me a peck on the cheek while apologizing. She asked if I could prepare dinner because she wanted to relax in the tub before our meal. Pouring herself a glass of wine, she headed to the master bath. It seemed like her method of erasing any evidence. Simply coming home and taking a shower would be too conspicuous. Debbie was clever enough to use the bath as a cover-up. How many other evenings had she employed this tactic? I swiftly put together a salad and a tray of cheese and crackers, then went upstairs to the bathroom. Shedding my clothes in the bedroom, I entered the bathroom completely naked. Debbie nearly jumped out of her skin when I joined her in the tub. "Mark, what on earth are you doing? Trying to give me a heart attack?" "Well, Deb, don't forget I live here too. Just thought we could share the hot water." Debbie exhibits a subtle giveaway when she's being untruthful or needs a moment to respond. Unaware of this habit, she blinks twice, a clue I've noticed but never mentioned. Just last week, our friend asked her opinion on a new hairstyle, and Debbie's tell appeared before she declared her absolute adoration. Her tell surfaced again as she spoke to me, mentioning how famished she was and inquiring about dinner. As you might have guessed, her use of words like absolutely is another tell. Before Debbie could wrap herself in a towel, I discreetly examined her for any signs of infidelity. No obvious marks, though I couldn't inspect her shaved area without raising suspicion. I briefly considered collecting bathwater to analyze for traces of sperm, but had no idea how to go about it. To my surprise, catching Debbie was remarkably straightforward. That evening, I downloaded a self-published guide titled The Amateur Detective, Catching the Cheating Spouse, on my Kindle. A few hours of reading provided me with enough insight, and the following morning, while Debbie was showering, I completed two crucial tasks. First, I checked her smartphone calendar, noting a recurring 2-hour block labeled Work Through Lunch for both yesterday and the previous Thursday. Clever of her indeed. The second task was to install a tracking app on her phone, which turned out to be a surprisingly simple task. However, on reflection, I realized that a similar application was already installed on my own phone. In a hurry, I deleted the app from Debbie's phone to avoid prematurely revealing my intentions. I decided to keep this app on my phone, anticipating its potential usefulness later. You often hear stories about how men, while maintaining the appearance of normality, collect evidence of their spouse's infidelity. But when faced with this on their own experience, they discover the true complexity of the situation. Over the next 5 days, I tried to play the role of a loving husband, even spending intimate moments with her on weekends, although it was difficult to get rid of the idea that she was with another man. Every morning, I checked her schedule, marking Tuesday morning as the most appropriate moment. Between noon and 2, I wrote in pencil, "I'm working until lunch." After breakfast, I drove to my office, pretending to be productive. On the way, I stopped at Walmart to purchase a disposable phone. At 11, I redirected calls from my main phone to a disposable one and left it on my desk. If Debbie had checked the tracking app she installed on my phone, it would have shown that I was 20 miles from her office. In case she called, I was ready to answer on a disposable phone. I arrived downtown with 15 minutes to spare and settled into the Starbucks opposite her office building. At noon, she emerged from the front doors accompanied by a man who bore a striking resemblance to Ryan Gosling. I discreetly left Starbucks to tail them, despite my attempts to blend in by following advice from a book, wearing a baseball cap, sunglasses, and placing a small stone in my shoe to alter my stride. It was futile. The couple remained oblivious to anything but each other's company as they strolled hand in hand into the lobby of Hotel Vintage. Realizing I had nearly 2 hours to spare, I crossed the street to the bank to handle financial matters, such as transferring funds, closing joint credit card accounts, and the home equity account. Additionally, I took steps to address our individual credit card accounts, knowing Debbie wouldn't discover the closures until later, when it was inconsequential. I promptly reached out to my company's legal team for a referral to a divorce attorney, securing an appointment for the following afternoon. With 30 minutes to spare, I returned to the hotel lobby. As I waited inconspicuously, pretending to peruse the Wall Street Journal but actually monitoring the elevator doors, the couple descended. I rose from my seat. "Debbie!" Her expression turned to one of shock. "Mark, no, God, no!" Simon positioned himself as a hero, interposing between me and Debbie with a cautionary gesture reminiscent of a traffic cop. Unaware of my boxing prowess, Debbie neglected to inform him, leaving him unprepared for the blow to his abdomen, causing him to collapse and lose control of his bladder. Debbie remained speechless, her mouth agape like a fish out of water. Before she could utter a word, I informed her, "You might as well reserve the room for the night because I don't want you returning home tonight, or perhaps ever again." Regrettably, upon returning home that afternoon, a police car pulled up, and when I opened the door, I was immediately handcuffed and taken to the Multnomah County Jail, where I was booked for assault. Simon had pressed charges against me. I ended up spending the night in jail before being released the following day on my own recognizance. Upon returning home, it was evident that Debbie had been there because almost everything small and of value, including the watch my father left me when he passed away, had been taken. I checked the closet, and Debbie's clothes were also gone. Good riddance. Despite the turmoil, I still managed to shower and make it to my appointment with the attorney. Over the next 3 months, the following events unfolded in no particular order. The charges against me were eventually dropped, largely thanks to the clerk at the registration desk, who informed the police that Simon had made the first move, and she had witnessed him raising his hand, which appeared to be in a threatening manner towards me. Perhaps she was one of those individuals who relished seeing someone like Simon, who had been involved with a married woman, face consequences. She didn't outright lie, but rather interpreted Simon's actions in a way that favored me. I only communicated with Debbie through our lawyers. She attempted the "can't we make this work" routine. I remained resolute with a no, and the divorce proceedings proceeded. When I declined to participate in counseling, Debbie became aggressive, seeking to claim over half of our shared property, as well as alimony. Fortunately, my luck held after Debbie's outburst, as my lawyer argued that despite living in a no-fault state, I shouldn't bear the consequences of her actions. The judge was persuaded. My lawyer employed a novel strategy, noting that while Debbie had the option to craft her own vows, she had agreed to traditional ones, including the commitment to forsake all others, implying an expectation of fidelity. Additionally, we presented a deposition from Debbie's colleague regarding a conversation in her office where she declined my lunch invitation to instead dine with Simon. Lastly, the bombshell revelation in court was Debbie's removal of my father's watch while I was in jail. The judge struggled to maintain a neutral expression upon hearing this testimony, but it clearly left an impression. Even Debbie's lawyer winced when the statement was read aloud. I obtained my divorce and reclaimed my watch. Debbie and I divided our marital assets evenly, with no alimony awarded to her. However, Debbie requested one final meeting before the paperwork was finalized, and I agreed out of sheer curiosity. So we met at her lawyer's office, and she started talking about how much she cared about me, expressed regret that she had succumbed to Simon's persuasions, and imagined a bright future for us as a couple. After listening to her story, I decided to continue the investigation. "Debbie, what about your past relationships?" Debbie hesitated for a moment before replying, "Mark, I've never been with anyone else while we were together." Disappointed, I replied, "Goodbye, Debbie." It seemed to annoy Debbie because 3 weeks later I received the CD in the mail. Despite the fact that I had a high opinion of Debbie's intelligence, there was a recording of her cheating with Simon on the CD. The video began with Debbie addressing the camera. "Mark, this is for you. Enjoy watching it." In the next scene, Debbie was already fully demonstrating her skills with her lover. The whole video lasted only 15 minutes, but it was incredibly exciting. I created an account on a website called Debbie Cheats with Simon and posted a video there. Every day, the site gained hundreds of views and lots of likes before I eventually deleted it. I had the thought of sending links to Debbie's parents, friends, and employer, but I changed my mind, deciding instead to defuse the situation. I never informed Debbie about the account on this site, but I sent her an email warning her that all new videos would be available to her father. Debbie responded with an apology, saying she was trying to make me jealous because of lingering resentments. She promised to stop such behavior. I tend to keep my emotions in check. Many who know me might even perceive me as aloof. Even after my divorce and despite watching the video, I didn't shed tears, drown myself in alcohol for a week, or contemplate drastic measures. It was a sorrowful experience. After all, Debbie had been my closest companion throughout our 6-year marriage. Her betrayal shattered my trust in others. When you start believing people are untrustworthy, you begin to interpret everyday interactions through the lens. I recall learning about this concept in my college psychology class. They termed it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Consequently, I began viewing minor incidents, like a bartender or sales clerk giving me incorrect change, as attempts to deceive me. These experiences gradually turned me into a cynic, exacerbated by the cutthroat nature of my sales job. Regarding relationships, I followed the typical pattern of pursuing casual encounters and frequenting bars, leading to a somewhat solitary existence. That is, until I crossed paths with Becky. A year post my divorce, I encountered Becky at a dinner hosted by some clients. Becky, possessing emerald eyes, blonde locks, a figure reminiscent of a Victoria's Secret model, and notably the demeanor of a woman you'd proudly introduce to your family, captivated me instantly. Her infectious smile and laughter illuminated the room and ignited something within me. Determined to charm her, I pulled out all the stops that evening, feeling as though I could have marketed Mexican beer with ease. Yet, despite my efforts, I found myself uncertain of winning her over. As the evening drew to a close, I mustered the courage to ask Becky out for dinner the following weekend. "How could I possibly refuse?" she responded. "You put in quite the effort tonight to sway me, and that deserves acknowledgement." Was it that obvious? Indeed, but I found it endearing. I even inquired with our hostess about your character, and she mentioned you have potential. So, let's venture out next Friday and explore that further. After 2 months of dating, we decided to move to a new level of relationship, taking our time. Even though we spent 4 or 5 evenings a week together, we lived separately. All my friends adored Becky, and I started falling in love with her myself. Our intimacy began shortly after we agreed to exclusivity. It was the most enjoyable experience I've had up to this point. In and out of the bedroom, we enjoyed each other's company. I started to believe that Becky could be my path to happiness, until suddenly, things took a turn for the worse. One day, while Becky and I were taking an early afternoon break from work and enjoying a beer, I noticed something off. Becky's phone rang, but she glanced at the caller ID and chose to ignore it. It was unusual behavior for her. Normally, she'd answer and promise to call back later. After my naivety with Debbie, I'd become more vigilant and suspicious. I wasn't willing to be the unwitting cuckold again. Later that night, I seized the chance to check her phone and saw a missed call from someone saved as JR at 3:30. Digging into the call log, I discovered several conversations between them. Further investigation revealed a meeting scheduled with JR at 1 the next day on Becky's calendar. It was time to retrieve my baseball cap, sunglasses, and detective mindset once more. On Thursday afternoon, I found myself in the sandwich shop across the street from Becky's office building. As she emerged from the building and made her way north on Broadway, towards the Marriott, I couldn't help but follow. Entering the lobby, I was shocked to see Becky conversing with a man at the reception desk. My disbelief turned to anger as I approached them. "You deceitful, dishonest woman." Becky's expression upon turning to face me mirrored that of someone confronted with a weapon. The man with her inquired, "Who is this?" Before Becky could respond, another man, identified by his Marriott name badge as Greg Houston, catering manager, approached. He looked bewildered as he observed the scene unfolding. However, before anyone could clarify, Becky fled the lobby. Amidst the chaos, I caught sight of the name badge of the first man, John Riley. On the second day of my visit, Mom extended an invitation to my siblings and their families for a lavish dinner. She prepared my favorite dish, her signature homemade lasagna, followed by my preferred dessert, her delectable chocolate cheesecake. It was all part of the prodigal son act. I assumed the role of the long-lost uncle, showering each of my nieces and nephews with extravagant electronic gifts, most of which they were too young to fully appreciate. I could sense their parents' eyes rolling at my extravagant gestures, but I believe they acknowledged the sentiment behind them. After everyone departed, my mom and I tackled the dishes together, seizing the opportunity to chat. Mom wasn't known for giving advice. That was always Dad's role. However, she possessed an innate ability to discern the right course of action. Hank Taylor still drops by occasionally. He always asks about you. When was the last time you two spoke? Not as frequently as we should, and before you mention it, yes, it's probably my fault for not keeping in touch. Why don't you give him a call? Hank had been my closest friend since kindergarten until I departed for college. Throughout K-12, we were inseparable. In Little League, he pitched while I caught, and for 6 years of football, he played quarterback while I was his wide receiver. I quit baseball during our freshman year, recognizing my mediocre batting skills. The track coach noticed my talent for pole vaulting and high jump during PE class. Football ended after our junior year due to my father's concern about potential injuries, jeopardizing my chances of securing a college track scholarship. As a junior, I ranked among the top high school pole vaulters nationally, with the University of Oregon poised to recruit me. My father's decision to prevent me from playing football had a detrimental impact on Hank's life. In our junior year, our football team narrowly missed qualifying for the state championships. A significant portion of our success was attributed to the Taylor-Miller duo, with me being Hank's primary target. However, his senior year was disappointing. Most of our receivers had poor catching abilities, resulting in Hank's statistics not meeting the requirements for a college football scholarship, which was his passion. Nonetheless, he managed to secure a baseball scholarship to Southern Illinois and excelled in that field. Despite knowing my father's influence on my decision to quit football, Hank never held it against me. I pursued my education at UO and was on a promising path to the Olympics until a freak accident ended my pole vaulting career. During warm-ups at the NCAA Finals, my pole unexpectedly snapped in two, a rare incident. The fall resulted in a severe knee injury that required 2 years of intensive therapy to reach 90% recovery. By the time I regained my physical abilities, the Olympic opportunity had passed, but I had obtained my bachelor's degree. Additionally, I received a substantial settlement from the pole manufacturer, resulting in $250,000 in my bank account. In case you're curious, Debbie couldn't access the $250,000. My dad had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. As I settled in Oregon and Hank at SIU, our connection began to weaken. I stood by him as a groomsman during his marriage to Janice and visited home last when Janice welcomed their second son. It had been over 2 years since I last saw Hank, but if he resented my absence, he didn't let it show. Within 30 minutes of calling his house, we were in his backyard sharing a beer. I caught up on Hank's life, his job as a Chicago firefighter, his wife Janice, and their 2 boys, Mark and Hank. Then it was my turn. Hank knew about my divorce from Mom, but didn't have details. He seemed less surprised than I expected, but when I mentioned my trust issues stemming from Becky's betrayal, he was taken aback. Ever since Debbie cheated, I've struggled to trust anyone. It feels like everyone's just looking out for themselves. Hank stared at me before responding. That's because for the past 12 years you've been surrounded by the wrong crowd. Let me share a story you don't know. While you were dating Ginny in high school, I was secretly in love with her. I can tell from your expression that you had no idea, and that's how it should be. A friend doesn't interfere with a friend's relationship no matter what. Remember that trip to my uncle's lodge in Door County? You couldn't make it until Saturday due to work, and neither could the girl I was seeing at the time, Stacy. Ginny and I went up to the lodge on Friday morning to prepare, and you and Stacy were supposed to join us Friday night. However, your car broke down, and you didn't arrive until late Saturday afternoon. So Ginny and I find ourselves alone for the night because we received your call that you're stuck in Milwaukee. We're sipping on cheap wine, Ginny's still rocking one of her bikinis from our lake swim. And just to add to the ambiance, the power goes out at the cabin, leaving us to rely on candlelight. And as for what went down between Ginny and me that night, absolutely nothing. because true friends never cross that line. And even if I weren't a friend and attempted to make a move on Ginny, you know what would have happened. Nothing. Because Ginny was the kind of girlfriend who would never betray her partner. You headed off to Oregon, leaving behind the people you could rely on to pursue your Olympic dream. That's fine. But you shouldn't have swapped your friends for self-centered opportunists only looking out for themselves. I pity you, Mark. It took me a moment to digest Hank's words. Then my mind drifted to Ginny. Do you have any clue where Ginny is or what she's been up to? I haven't seen her since that first Christmas when I returned home during my freshman year at Oregon. We pretty much called it quits that week. Another long-distance romance down the drain. It didn't help that I pledged Delta and the sorority girls were readily available. Ginny was here a couple of months ago. She's a widow now with a 5-year-old son. A widow? What happened? Her husband was on his last tour in Afghanistan. He was shot. She didn't go into details. But I know he received some significant bravery medals. Posthumously, unfortunately. Ginny is trying to cope for the sake of their son, but you can see she's barely holding it together. She's still living in San Diego County near the base, and his fellow officers keep an eye on her. She might appreciate hearing from you if you want her email. Is she still attractive? Did anything happen between you two while she was in town? I checked over my shoulder to ensure Janice couldn't hear us, but the storm door was shut. You haven't been paying attention, Mark. What's going on with you? First off, I would never cheat on Janice. And secondly, Ginny and I would never get involved. It's not who we are. You need to snap out of it. Only Hank Taylor could talk to me like that. That evening, I emailed Ginny. Ginny, Hank Taylor gave me your email address. I hope it's okay for me to reach out. I'll be in the San Diego area this weekend and wondered if I could take you and your son to lunch or dinner on either Friday or Saturday, just to catch up. Best regards, Mark. Early Tuesday morning, I received a pleasant surprise reply. Mark, how nice to hear from you after all these years. Lunch on Friday works for me and my son Kevin. My address is XXXX. I'll see you at noon unless I hear otherwise. Your friend, Ginny. Hank began his shift on Tuesday, meaning he'd be at the fire station until I left town. Despite that, he extended an invitation for me to tour the station and dine with his crew. I accepted, finding myself seated at a table amidst a diverse group of individuals. Black, white, Hispanic, men, and women. It's challenging to articulate the mix of emotions I experienced as I sat between two of Hank's fellow firefighters. They graciously fielded my inquiries, likely accustomed to civilians marveling at what they saw as routine. What became clear was the paramount importance of trust in executing their duties while battling a blaze. Each firefighter ventured into a burning structure knowing their team had their back, a fundamental necessity. It was perhaps in that moment that I began to recognize the juncture where my life veered off course. In high school, I transitioned from team sports like baseball and football to individual events in track and field. While the track team's success relied on collective effort, my performance hinged solely on my own endeavors. Similarly, my profession in sales mirrored this individualistic ethos. Whether I closed a deal depended almost entirely on my actions. The sole exception to this solo trajectory since I was 15 was my marriage to Debbie. Could my marital breakdown be attributed in part to my self-centeredness, or perhaps to marrying someone who shared similar self-centered traits? Semper Fidelis. On Thursday, I arrived in San Diego, picked up a rental car, and checked in at the Coronado. The next day, I drove north to Ginny's residence, one of the 4 units in a quad townhome. As I rang the doorbell, I discreetly held a bouquet of flowers, hoping to avoid the prying eyes of a curious neighbor. My heart nearly skipped a beat when Ginny opened the door. She looked even more stunning than she did at 19, adorned in a vibrant blue sundress with a young boy clinging to her leg. Mark, it's so good to see you, she greeted, embracing me and planting a kiss on my cheek. Are those for me? She asked, gesturing towards the flowers. Though it seemed like an obvious question, I sensed she wanted me to say something, as I stood there somewhat stunned. Without a word, I handed her the bouquet. Thank you, Mark. Please come in while I put these in water, she said as she ushered me inside. Mark, this is my son, Kevin. Kevin, meet Mr. Miller, an old friend from my school days before I met your daddy, Ginny introduced. Kevin extended his small hand and said, Hello, Mr. Miller. Finally gathering my composure, I replied, Hello, Kevin, shaking his hand. As Ginny arranged the flowers in a vase, I scanned the apartment. My attention was immediately drawn to the folded flag positioned at the center of the bookcase. One side displayed a photo of a Marine adorned with two medals, the Purple Heart and the Navy Cross. That's my dad, Ginny remarked. Turning to the other side of the flag, I observed a photo featuring Ginny, her husband, and a young Kevin at the beach. Just then, Ginny entered the room. Ginny, forgive me if I don't articulate this well, but this is a stunning photo. You all look deeply in love. You must miss him, I said. No need for apologies. That's a kind thing to say, and yes, we were passionately in love. I met him at Northwestern. He was in the ROTC program while I pursued journalism. Many of my classmates couldn't fathom why I fell for a military man, as they held little respect for the armed forces. But Chuck wasn't just strong and confident. He was trustworthy, with a heart of gold. Trust, that word again. Ginny's eyes glistened as she gazed at the photo. Sensing the need to break the silence, I suggested, Are you still up for lunch? Yes. We should catch up. Come on, Kevin. Mr. Miller is treating us to Red Robin. Kevin was quite enthusiastic about it, so instead of transferring the car seat to my rental, we opted to ride in Ginny's car. The conversation was livelier during the drive, and by the time we arrived at the restaurant, the three of us were chuckling at one of Kevin's silly jokes. Lunch was delightful. Despite the many changes Ginny had experienced since we last met, marriage, motherhood, widowhood, she remained the same, kind, intelligent, amusing, and captivating. At one point, Ginny inquired about my reason for being in San Diego. I felt sheepish but decided to be honest. I mentioned the scolding I received from both my mom and Hank, so the truth is, I came here to apologize to you for how things ended between us back then. You deserved better, and frankly, hearing about your marriage to Chuck, you did much better. What's your plan now, heading back to Portland? My flight isn't until Sunday evening. I think I'll spend the next couple of days on the beach doing some running and trying to clear my head. I have a lot to contemplate. Kevin entertained himself by coloring with the crayons provided by the restaurant for kids while the two of us caught up. But after 2 hours, we realized time was getting on, so we drove back to Ginny's. Mark, would you like to join a barbecue at my friend's place tomorrow? What, and miss a day alone with my thoughts? You're asking a lot. Ginny chuckled. Well, if you reconsider and decide to join us at the barbecue, swing by to pick me up at 11 tomorrow. Dress casually, wear shorts and a polo shirt. Oh, and don't forget to bring some beer. I assured Ginny I'd be there, planted a kiss on her cheek, and shook Kevin's hand. As I drove back to my hotel, memories of why I adored Ginny during our high school years flooded my mind. The following day, Ginny, Kevin, and I attended the picnic. Ginny was dressed in white cutoff shorts and a bra-top t-shirt. While the shorts were appropriate for a family event, they showcased her well-toned legs. The top hinted at her cleavage, exuding a subtle allure. She styled her blonde hair in a ponytail and wore aviator sunglasses that concealed her brown eyes. After parking the car, Ginny held my hand as she introduced me to her friends. As we approached a group of men, all of whom seemed to be Marines, I could sense their scrutiny. It felt like the picnic was partly a test to determine if I was suitable to date Ginny. After the introductions, Ginny left me to ensure Kevin was settled with the other children. Or so she claimed. Addressing the group, I said, "I hope this isn't too cliché, but thank you for your service." Captain John Clayton responded on behalf of the group, saying, "Whether it's cliché or not, it's always appreciated. My father served in Vietnam, and I can see the joy in his eyes whenever we're out together, and I'm in uniform and someone expresses gratitude. It's a stark contrast to his reception after returning from Nam." The conversation then shifted to more pleasant subjects, including the typical icebreaker of sports. The day flew by. I divided my time between chatting with Ginny, spending time with the men, and even joining the ladies in the kitchen for an hour to exchange cooking tips. As the day drew to a close, I was invited to join the men at a local tavern after dropping Ginny off at home. Kevin was asleep in his car seat. So, did I make the cut? I believe so, but I might receive a call from Doreen after you head to the tavern. And another call tomorrow once the men debrief with their wives. I hope you don't mind too much. They're a close-knit group that looks out for each other. I'll always be connected to them because of Chuck. He and John Clayton were very close in Afghanistan. I held my breath and decided to voice the question that had been swirling in my mind. So, the fact that I'm being vetted means you want to continue seeing me? Yes, Mark. We've both changed since high school, but there's still something in my heart for you. If you're interested in continuing to see me, I'd like that very much. I'd like that too, Ginny. Let the vetting process begin. We chuckled, and I reminisced about how much I used to enjoy the sound of her laughter. I'll probably be leaving the bar late. Can we plan to meet tomorrow, assuming I pass the tests? Ginny chuckled once more. I usually attend Mass at 10. You're welcome to join me or come by afterwards. She gazed into my eyes. When was the last time you went to Mass, Mark? Besides for funerals and weddings, it's been at least a decade. I gradually drifted away from the church when I moved to Oregon. I didn't lose faith, just stopped attending services. We pulled up to her house. I carefully lifted Kevin from his car seat and carried him to his bed. Glancing back, I saw Ginny standing in the doorway, smiling at us. I walked over, embraced her, and gave her a kiss. She returned it. See you tomorrow. I'll be here at 9:30. Wish me luck. I entered the bar and was greeted by 5 men, among them John Clayton. What can I get you, Mark? Glancing at the taps, I replied, A stone would be nice. Rodriguez, 1 stone for our friend, the bartender called out. As he poured my pint, the 6 of us settled at a table. John, evidently the leader, initiated the conversation. Mark, we're not trying to give you a hard time, but you have to understand. 3 of us here, including myself and Roddy the bartender, owe our lives to Chuck Turner. Did Ginny fill you in on that? No, I noticed the Navy Cross, so I figured it was something significant, but I didn't want to pry, so I kept quiet. Compliments to you, it's a sign of respect. Let me tell you a story, though. We were conducting a patrol in the mountains near Pakistan when we were suddenly attacked by around 40 Taliban fighters. Calling in an airstrike wasn't an option due to the risk of triggering an avalanche. Retreating wasn't feasible either, as they would have maintained the advantageous high ground and picked us off easily. Chuck made the decision for us to flank them while he and Rodriguez held their position to draw the enemy closer. It took us 3 grueling hours to maneuver through that rugged terrain and get behind the Taliban. Throughout those 3 hours, Chuck and Roddy kept them engaged. We managed to execute the flanking maneuver successfully, and with the advantage of the high ground, we were able to eliminate the threat. However, by the time we reached Chuck and Roddy, they had both been wounded. Chuck had sustained 4 wounds and was still fighting valiantly, but he passed away in my arms. Roddy was unconscious, with injuries to his head and leg. Roddy now has a prosthetic leg, which is why he's working as a bartender instead of being on active duty. So, that's why Ginny is our responsibility, at least until someone else steps in to take that responsibility off our shoulders, someone deserving. I understand, John. Let me respond like this. Ask Ginny if I ever did anything disrespectful during the 3 years we were together. My biggest mistake was letting her go, but in the end, it turned out for the best, because she met Chuck and they had their son. I didn't have the maturity back then to be a good husband or father. I've never laid a hand on a woman in anger, not even when I found my first wife with another man. I might not have the courage to charge into gunfire like you do, but I'm not a coward either. I wouldn't hesitate to stand up and protect the person I love from harm. I recently realized I can be a bit self-centered, but I'm committed to improving. Now that I understand where I stand, may I ask you all a question? I paused to glance around the table. Do I have your blessing to continue seeing Ginny? Some might view this as excessive, seeking permission to date an adult. However, I perceived it as a gesture of respect for their care for a fellow comrade's widow. It wasn't insincere. Rather, I'm adept at understanding people, which makes me a good communicator. Moreover, it felt appropriate to ask, given the warm smiles from John and the others. Roddy, could you bring us a round of Knob Creek, please? Rodriguez brought 7 shot glasses, each half filled with the amber liquid. John raised his glass for a toast. To Captain Chuck Turner. Rodriguez joined us as we all clinked glasses and drank. We lingered for a couple more hours, pacing ourselves to avoid driving under the influence, discussing various topics. At one point, John divulged why Ginny wasn't currently seeing anyone. Ginny and another Marine were getting serious last year. The issue was Ginny couldn't commit to another Marine, especially after losing her first husband. And Tom always dreamed of being a Marine. He told Ginny he'd leave the Marines, but she warned him she'd never speak to him again if he did. Tom transferred to Lejeune shortly after. Ginny hasn't been serious with anyone since, until she received your email. Doreen mentioned she was quite excited about your visit that day. Just keep this between us. I won't breathe a word. Thanks for sharing. The following day marked the beginning of my courtship with Ginny. I accrued significant Alaska Air frequent flyer miles shuttling between Portland and San Diego, spending every other weekend with Ginny and Kevin. With the escalating costs of hotel rooms on top of airfare and Ginny's reluctance to take our relationship to the next level, John and Doreen graciously offered me their guest room. Back home, I made a conscious effort to improve my social skills. Even my boss noticed a positive change in my demeanor. I joined the company softball team, and in San Diego, Ginny and I teamed up for doubles tennis at the base courts, where we performed admirably for new partners. On my 5th trip to San Diego, 3 months since my initial visit, I disembarked the plane and hopped into Ginny's car, only to notice Kevin's absence from his car seat. Where's Kevin? I inquired. Doreen and John are looking after him this weekend. I have a surprise for you. I hope you'll like it, Ginny replied, pulling away from the curb, heading north on I-5 without divulging our destination. Ginny remained tight-lipped about our plans, so we passed the time catching up on other matters. She mentioned Kevin's disappointment at not seeing me until Sunday. He was becoming quite fond of me. I could sense Ginny's satisfaction in her voice. As we drove, I couldn't help but notice Ginny wearing the same blue sundress from our first lunch, sans bras this time. We drove up to the La Jolla Beach and Tennis Resort. She smiled broadly at me. I think it's time, isn't it? In response to her question, I broke into a wide grin. As soon as she parked the car, I grabbed her and kissed her. You know I've fallen in love with you again, don't you, Mark? Well, thank God, because I've been hoping for this since that very first weekend. I love you, Ginny. What a weekend! Ginny and I ordered room service and were close all Friday night. Let me just say that by the time I passed out after 2 a.m., I had a big smile on my face. We played tennis on Saturday afternoon, and on Saturday evening we were close. Sunday morning brought a surprise when Ginny took us to the beach. In the late afternoon, we returned to the cliffs to pick up Kevin and headed for the Claytons' house. John greeted me warmly with a handshake and a beer, and Doreen hugged me and smiled. Kevin snuggled up to my legs and spent the whole evening with me. He looked depressed when Ginny saw me off at the airport. On the way home, I made a decision. 2 weeks later, we found ourselves back at the Claytons for our usual Friday evening drinks. Once John and I were alone, I confided in him, "I'm planning to propose to Ginny unless you see any reason why I shouldn't. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. She's head over heels for you, and I can't imagine anyone better suited for her or anything that could make her happier. So does this mean she'll be moving to Portland? If she says yes and agrees, I'm working on relocating us back to the Chicagoland area. She misses her family and siblings." "That's fantastic, Mark. She's mentioned her family to Doreen before. How are you going to approach this with Kevin?" "I'm taking him out to lunch tomorrow to talk about it. Keep your fingers crossed for me. You might be surprised by his reaction. That kid really likes you." The following day, Ginny gave me a strange look when I mentioned that Kevin and I had some errands to run together. However, I managed to brush it off as simply spending time bonding as guys. We went straight to Red Robin and found a table. While sharing 2 milkshakes, I posed the question. "Kevin, what do you think if I were to ask your mother to marry me? Would that be all right?" I held my breath, awaiting his response. "That would be great, Mr. Miller. My mom really likes you." "And you, Kevin, do you think it's okay for me to live with your mom and you?" "Yeah. Does that mean you'll be my dad?" "Sort of. I could never replace your real dad." "What did you used to call him?" "I called him Dad." "Well, if your mom and I get married, how about you call me Pop? Would that work for you?" Kevin's face lit up with a sweet smile as he replied, "Sure." We then made our way back to his house. 2 approvals down, 1 to go. I suspected Kevin wouldn't be able to keep our conversation confidential. As soon as we entered, I had the ring ready while Kevin carried a bunch of red roses. Ginny's smile widened at the sight of the roses, but confusion crossed her face as I knelt down. "Ginny, will you marry me?" Not the most creative proposal, but it got the message across. Ginny dropped to her knees and embraced me tightly. "Yes, Mark, I love you." That was all I needed to hear. Kevin joined in the embrace. Unfortunately, he forgot to put down the roses first, and their thorns scratched my neck. Fortunately, that was probably the worst thing that happened throughout our years together. I'll keep it concise. My life with Ginny is filled with blessings. We tied the knot 3 months after my proposal. I landed a fantastic sales job at a startup just north of Chicago, which keeps us close to our families and old friends. Kevin now has a brother and sister, and they all affectionately call me Pop, just as Kevin does. Despite having 3 kids, Ginny still looks stunning. We still enjoy playing doubles tennis, and between us, we've even picked up volleyball. Whenever we visit the Claytons, we make sure to get a game in at Black's Beach. Last May, we met up with the Claytons in Washington, D.C. We did the usual touristy stuff, and on Memorial Day, we paid our respects at Chuck's gravesite in Arlington. It had been a decade since Captain Turner was taken from his family, and it was a solemn day. I was grateful to have John and Doreen there to support Kevin, Ginny, and me. It took a while for smiles to return, and even afterward there were moments of sorrow. But honoring those who willingly risk everything in service, whether in the military, police, or fire department, felt like the right thing to do. After we returned home, it took some time, but life resumed its normal rhythm, albeit with Captain Charles Turner's flag, medals, and photo on our bookshelf. I'm deeply humbled that Ginny and Kevin have welcomed me into their lives after having such a courageous man as their husband and father. For me, I'm happy I've become receptive to understanding the true essence of trust. Even Hank has ceased his threats to boot me. However, he still expresses annoyance whenever I fail to hit the cutoff man in our softball league matches. My justification? I'm captivated by the lovely blonde with 3 enthusiastic kids in the bleachers. Life is treating me well.